"Are you kidding me?" Alan yells. I was completing a line in my notebook. "Look around, newbie," Alan barked. He was on one side of the crime tape and I was on the other. My other 6 partners were also with Alan on the other side. I was in the crime scene and they were out of the crime scene. "There are 6 of us standing here. Does anything stand out to you?" Kenny Riggs was murdered in the concrete side yard of his modest home. He'd been tied up and beaten severely before he was eventually shot in the head. His son discovered his body. "I'm talking about you, kid, not whatever's in your stupid notebook. Look at the 6 of us," Alan began singing the song from Sesame Street. You know that song, "One of these things is not like the others, one of these things just doesn't belong," and oh my, several of the seasoned detectives began to laugh. Rick tried to keep a straight face. "Stop, knucklehead. Look where you're standing." He's looking at me and I'm looking at him. And he said, "The more you walk in that scene, the more you're going to track blood." Rick couldn't contain himself any longer. "Yeah, if we arrest the killer based on the shoe print evidence, Wallace is our guy." I actually slipped out of my shoes and I carried them from the crime scene, walking delicately like a man trying to avoid landmines. Fortunately, cell phone technology hadn't surpassed the simple flip phone. This Truth in True Crime video series we're about to start is intended to be a practical wisdom and a Christian evidence series. And while every session includes a real death investigation, I've exchanged details between cases to protect the identity of victims and suspects, and I've altered the storylines to protect ongoing investigations. We're going to chase a few leads together. And along the way, you may pick up a guiding principle or two to help you thrive and flourish as a human created in the image of God. These sessions and clues will be valuable even if you don't believe in God. But make no mistake about it, each lead affirms an aspect of biblical anthropology, the description of human nature offered by our divine Creator on the pages of the Bible. But first, let's define what we mean by wisdom. While most of us want to be wise, we often fail to distinguish wisdom from knowledge. Wisdom is sometimes described as accumulated philosophical or scientific learning or scholarly knowledge. But if wisdom is nothing more than learning or knowledge, why not just use those words to describe it? Wisdom appears to be something different, something more. Igor Grossman, the director of the Wisdom and Culture Lab at the University of Waterloo in Canada, he once invited behavioral and social scientists to explore the possibility of a scientific consensus on the psychological characteristics of wisdom and best practices for its measurement. Here's what they concluded. Moral aspiration was one of 2 pillars of wisdom. In other words, scientists, like philosophers before them, considered wisdom to be morally grounded. For example, is there a wise way to commit a murder? Or is murder unwise by definition, based on its immoral nature? If wise choices are defined by their moral goodness, well then who gets to decide what's morally good and therefore wise? Look, I'm interested in better wisdom, the kind of wisdom that's grounded in more than my opinion. If objective, transcendent wisdom is morally grounded, as philosophers and theologians and even scientists agree, then it requires an objective, transcendent source for moral truth. That kind of wisdom is unavailable if moral truths are simply personal or even collective opinions. Is moral truth simply a matter of personal opinion or cultural consensus? Well, do crime families or crime cultures get to decide what's morally virtuous? Or is there a transcendent, objective standard for moral virtue? The Bible declares the foolishness of God is wiser than man's wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than man's strength. Christianity recognizes the value of wisdom and its dependence on moral virtue. But unlike human attempts to ground wisdom subjectively in popular moral opinions, Christianity grounds wisdom in the unchanging, dependable nature of God. I wiped the bottom of my shoes, and I followed along with the rest of the homicide team as the patrol sergeant briefed us about our observations prior to our arrival. I didn't say a word for the rest of the evening. Look, I was embarrassed to say the least. Looking back, I understand the role this failure played in my journey toward wisdom. Look, definitions describing wisdom as mere knowledge are inadequate. A better definition would include the important role of experience, like this one. Wisdom is the ability to use your knowledge and experience to make good decisions and judgments. Now, this definition recognizes our moral aspirations to make good decisions and judgments, but also acknowledges the role of experience. We're more likely to experience failure than success, right? I mean, you know that. It's much easier to thoughtlessly mess things up than to mindfully succeed. Just ask me. I've got a story about a crime scene I can share with you. But failure appears to be the root of wisdom and success. One study spanning over 40 years and studying over 1 million pieces of data concluded that, quote, every winner begins as a loser. Why? Because failure often leads to honest self-examination, and honest self-examination to wisdom, if the failing party is willing to learn. That's what happened to me. I made that mistake of being on the wrong side of the crime tape just once. So here's a diagram of the nature of better wisdom. It includes 4 dimensions: knowledge gained in an area, objective moral foundations, courage to make age-appropriate mistakes, and experience from making those mistakes. So how can you and I embrace better wisdom? Let's chase a few leads together. Now, keep in mind, I'm only going to mention 4 leads in this video, but there's so much more in the book, The Truth in True Crime. But let's just start with these. First, embrace your age-appropriate mistakes. Everyone errs. Just do your best to fail in an age-appropriate manner. Don't sweat the blunders of your youth or the mistakes you make when you are new on the job. This is the time when you're supposed to make mistakes. Second, admit when you're the fool. People who can't admit they make a mistake often refuse to change. Why change? I didn't do anything wrong in the first place. Biblical wisdom calls us to do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but rather in humility to value others above ourselves. Here's another one. Let others fail for you. Oliver Wendell Holmes once recommended, quote, learn from the mistakes of others. You can't live long enough to make them all yourself, and that's very true. Wisdom comes from life experiences and failures, but they don't have to be your experiences and failures. And build a new foundation. Construct a foundation of ancient wisdom to limit your mistakes going forward. Start by consulting the master builder. According to the Bible, people who lack wisdom should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault. King Solomon once wrote, by wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it's established. By knowledge the rooms are filled with precious and pleasant riches. Jesus said everyone who heard his words and did them would be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. Rock-solid decisions are built on the rock-solid wisdom of Jesus. As a new detective, I knew I had a lot to learn and that knowledge and wisdom were important. Most everyone understands this. As it turns out, the Bible described humans as learners and wisdom seekers long before it was proved with scientific studies. God created us to learn and seek wisdom. The Bible says our desire begins in our youth when we are trained up in the way we should go, continues every day as we grow with our parents, and extends into our lives as disciples of Jesus. In fact, the very word disciple comes from the Latin word discipulus, which means student or learner. If you're a disciple, you're a learner. So if you're wondering why we value education and why learning is one of the many keys to human flourishing, now you know. It's part of the Creator's design. We pursue wisdom initially because we know it's available. We pursue wisdom continually because we innately recognize we will never know everything that God knows. Wisdom matters to humans. It's why we continue to seek truth and watch videos, even a video series like this. We were created to learn.